As a pediatric OT, when parents come to me wondering if their child might be autistic, there are 6 specific questions I ask them. Now, I want to be clear. These questions don't give you a diagnosis on their own. Instead, they help us look at the bigger picture to work out whether a multidisciplinary evaluation is the right next step. So, if you've been wondering, these are the questions I'd ask you if your child is between 18 months and 3 years of age. Now, this first one catches most parents off guard because they think they know the answer straight away, and that is, does your child consistently use eye contact to communicate with you? Most parents say yes, of course my child makes eye contact. They look at me all the time. But that's not quite what I'm asking. Lots of children with autism will look at you. Some will even hold your gaze for a really long time. What I'm asking is something more specific. Whether they use their eyes to tell you something. For example, you're at the playground and your toddler spots a dog. They look back at you with their eyes wide open as if to say, check it out, it's a dog. That's eye contact doing the work of communication. By around 18 months, this should be happening all the time. And it tends to show up in 3 main ways. The first is to share their excitement. So your child sees something cool, like that dog or a fire engine going past, and they look back at you to check that you saw it too. The second is to express how they feel. So you might serve them dinner and there's broccoli on the plate and they scrunch their nose and then look up at you to let you know that they think it's disgusting. And the third is asking for things. So for example, they might want a biscuit that's on the bench, so they look at you, then look at the biscuit, then look back at you. They're using their eyes to ask you for help without saying a word. Now, what we tend to see is that a child with autism uses eye contact differently. They might look at you sometimes, but the purpose isn't to share something or check in with you. For example, when they find something really exciting, they might not look back at you to see if you're watching. Or if they're struggling with something, they might not look at you in a way that says, hey, I need a little help here. So it's not about never making eye contact. It's the way in which they're using it, or in this case, not necessarily using it to communicate. Now, the next thing I'd ask you is, what does your child's play look like? And when I ask that question, I usually get a blank look, and I get it. As parents, we don't really think about how our kids play, they just play. That's just what kids do. But play actually develops in a pretty predictable way. Under 12 months, it's mostly exploratory. They bang things together to see what noise they make, and they shove everything in their mouth. They're not playing with the toy so much, they're just figuring out what it tastes like, what it feels like, what it sounds like, and what happens when they throw it. Then, at around 18 months, early stages of pretend play start to appear. For example, they'll grab an empty cup off the coffee table and pretend to take a sip and then sigh afterwards, like they just had a really good cup of tea. Or they'll pick up a phone and hold it to their ear and they'll start babbling away. This is them pretending, and they are the main character. Then, at around 2 years of age, they're no longer the only character in their game. They start to involve everyone around them. So instead of just drinking the empty cup of tea themselves, they push it against your mouth so that you can take a sip too. And then finally, the toys start to come alive and they make noises. So the dinosaur starts roaring and the baby doll cries and needs feeding. The toys are no longer objects, they're characters, and little storylines start to appear. For example, instead of just roaring, the dinosaur starts to eat blocks and knock over towers. Now, what you should notice is their play isn't logical, but it does change day to day. So maybe today the dinosaur is hungry and tomorrow he might be chasing cars around. Now, for kids with autism, play often doesn't follow this progression. Sometimes there isn't much pretend play at all. Instead, their play might look more repetitive. For example, they might line up their toys in a row the same way every time. Or they might seem more interested in parts of the toy rather than playing with the whole thing. So instead of driving a car around, they might flip it over and spin the wheels over and over. And sometimes it does look like pretend play. The toys are talking and there is a storyline. But the play is still repetitive, and by that I mean they act out the same sequence every single time. The characters say the same things in the same order and it has the exact same ending. It's more like a script that they're running through. And a lot of the time, that script has come straight from a TV show. They're acting out their favorite episode, scene for scene. So when you're looking at your little one's play, there are two patterns worth noticing. If the play itself is repetitive, or the pretend play looks creative on the surface, but it's really the same script playing out again and again. If you notice either of those things, it's just worth jotting down. Now, the answer to the next question is often something you'll spot while your little one is playing, and that is, does your child share things with you? Now, this is different to asking for help. Kids with autism will ask for help all the time. For example, if the truck they're playing with breaks, they'll bring it over to you to fix. What I'm talking about here is whether your child shares things with you just for the sake of sharing. For example, if the wheels on the toy truck they're playing with lights up and your toddler thinks it's the coolest thing they've ever seen, they'll come running over to you, point to the wheels, look up at you, then push the car to make the lights flash, and then look back at you just to make sure that you saw it too. Now, children do this dozens of times a day. They find a stick at the playground and they hold it up as if to say, look at what I found. Or they see a bird on the street and they point to it and look back at you to make sure you saw it too. They're constantly wanting to share their world with you. What we tend to see in kids with autism is they don't have that same drive to share things with those around them. It's not like they don't enjoy the toy or notice the bird. It's that the impulse to bring you into it isn't quite there in the same way. Now, just quickly before we move on, if all of this talk about milestones has you wondering what your little ones should be doing at every age, I put together a free communication milestone guide that walks you through 0 to 4 years of age. It covers eye contact, gestures, and language, all the things we're talking about. And the link to that's in the description if you want to grab it. Okay, so we've just talked about what happens when your child tries to share something with you. This next question is the other side of that. What happens when you try to share something with them? Specifically, do they follow your point or your gaze? Now, I know this sounds a little vague, so I want to give you an example. Imagine your little one is playing on the floor in their room and there's a toy on the top shelf in their cupboard. And you look up at it and point and say, wow, look at that. What you typically see is your child follows your finger with their eyes, looks at that shelf, and then finds the toy, and then they look back at you. Or they might even get up and toddle over to the cupboard to try and reach it themselves. The point is they followed where you were pointing. They tracked the line from your finger to the thing that you wanted them to see, and they connected the dots that mum's looking at something and I should look too. A child with autism often responds a little differently. They might look at your hand instead of following the point, or they might look at your arm, or in some cases, they might not respond at all. It's almost like they don't quite realize you're trying to show them something. So if you notice your child isn't necessarily following your point or your gaze, then that's something to note down. Now, pointing is really just one example of something bigger I'd want to know about, and that is if your child is using gestures to communicate. Now, gestures are simply body movements that you use to communicate something without having to say a word. And typically, toddlers use gestures a lot. They wave hello and goodbye, they shake their head for no and nod for yes, they put their arms up when they want to be picked up, they blow kisses, they clap when something exciting happens, and they put their finger to their lips for shush. By 18 months, most kids are using gestures all the time, and typically when they're using them, they pair them with eye contact and sound. So for example, if your toddler is saying goodbye, they will look at you, wave, and say something like bye or ba, all at the same time. For a child with autism, gestures often look a little bit different. Sometimes they don't really use them at all, so they might not wave or nod their head, or you might see some gestures, but they're inconsistent. They'll wave one day and not the next, or they'll nod when prompted, but not spontaneously. And sometimes they will use gestures, but they aren't coordinated with eye contact or sound. For example, they might wave but not look at you, or they might look at you but not wave. So when I'm asking about gestures, I'm not just asking if your child waves. What I'm really asking is, do they use a range of gestures? Do they use them on their own without being prompted? And do they do them while looking at you and making a sound? If not, then that's another thing worth noting down. Now, the next thing I'd like to know about is whether your child consistently responds to their name. And the key word here is consistently. Kids can get pretty absorbed in what they're doing, and it's not unusual for them to miss their name the first time you call it. But typically, by the second or third time, they'll respond. They'll stop what they're doing and look up at you. They might wait for you to tell them what you wanted, or they'll go straight back to whatever they were doing. What you're looking for here is a clear moment where they pause, register that you've said their name and acknowledged you. Even if it's just a glance up and then back down again, that's a moment of recognition. For children with autism, this is often just not as consistent. Now and then they might respond to their name the first time you say it, but at other times you might have to call them 3 or 4 times before they look up. Or you might be standing right next to them, saying their name clearly, and still you get nothing. Now, just to be clear, this isn't deliberate. They're not pretending they can't hear you to avoid getting into trouble. It's more like they haven't quite registered that their name belongs to them, and that when someone says it, you're meant to respond. If this is something you're noticing with your little one, the first thing to do is get their hearing assessed, because the lack of response could be just down to a hearing issue. But if their hearing test comes back fine and you're still noticing this pattern where your child's not consistently responding to their name, that's something worth noting. Now, if you've been answering yes to most of these questions, the next step is to take what you've noticed to your child's doctor. They'll work with you to figure out whether a multidisciplinary evaluation is the right call, and if it is, they'll refer you to the appropriate services. Now, one thing I'll add is that tantrums tend to be a daily battle in most households, but they can be especially intense if your child is on the spectrum or has a developmental delay. Either way, how you respond in those moments matter. Done right, and it can actually shorten the tantrum, sometimes dramatically. Done in the not so ideal way, it can drag it out and make everything harder. In this video right here, I walk you through exactly how to respond when your toddler is mid-tantrum to help you get through them quickly without unintentionally prolonging it. Some of it might feel a bit brutal at first, but it works. And the reason it works is because it matches what's actually happening in your child's brain in that moment. So go ahead and click here to watch that video next.